Welcome to the WISE Founder Story session. My name is Touhami and I am part of the WISE team. So WISE stands for the World Innovation Summit for Education. It's an initiative by Qatar Foundation. Every 2 years, we organized a major summit in the city of Doha in Qatar, and we gather around 2,000 international delegates from the global education community. And the objective is for these delegates to meet, exchange experiences, build partnerships, and find concrete, innovative, and creative solutions to major education challenges. So this year's summit will be from November 14 to 16th in the city of Doha in Qatar. And the theme is co-create, coexist, co-create, learning to live and work together. So although the summit is a pillar of the WISE initiative, WISE is also about research and implementation of programs. And one of those programs is the WISE Accelerator. And the WISE Accelerator every year selects 5 organizations, whether for-profit or non-profits, that are working in EdTech. And they were selected because they have high potential for scalability and positive impact. And what WISE provides is organizational support, visibility, and opportunity for networking. So our organizations are tackling major challenges, from introducing quality education to refugee camps, to fostering intercultural understanding, to helping schools and teachers track students' performance. So although the impact of this organization is major and important, what is also important is the people behind these organizations. And today we have 5 of those who are here to share their personal experiences about what it takes to found an initiative in EdTech, what it takes to start it from scratch, and what it takes to build it and take it to the next level. So I am glad to introduce our first speaker, Henri, who's the CEO and founder of Edukasyon.ph. Henri, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me. So I am Henry Motte-Munoz. I'm the CEO and founder of Edukasyon.ph. We are a for-profit social enterprise, headquartered in the UK, but operating in Southeast Asia. Our aim is very simple. It's to get every student to find a quality, affordable, and relevant education that prepares them for the world of employment. So as this is about the founder stories, I just want to share a little bit about my background. So I'm Filipino-French, and all throughout my educational choices, I always felt very lucky. First of all, both my parents were college educated, but perhaps more importantly, my father had studied and eventually worked in the field that I was interested in. So as I was figuring out what to do in high school, where to apply to college, what topic to take, etc., I always had the guidance of someone who was going to be my professional role model, if you will. Unfortunately, this is not true for most people. Most of us do not want to do what our parents were doing, and that's perfectly healthy. The problem is, even though we want to do a separate subject, we always end up asking for advice from those closest to us. And so it's people who are in a way the least qualified who are having the biggest bearing on your decisions. If I look at the statistics for today's youth, the question that we ask ourselves is, are they happy with the advice that they're getting? Are students in the world able to make choices that they're happy with? Unfortunately, the answer is no. I think all of college graduates believe that they want to take a higher education course to improve their employability post-graduation. That seems like a no-brainer to everyone in this room. I think the saddening statistic is half of students feel that their college degree did not improve in any way, shape, or form their ability to get a job. This is the problem that you need to fix. And so if you go back to how you can help those students, I kept trying to go back to my own journey, which was what advice was helpful for me? What in my journey prepared me, and what was the kind of advice that I wish I had received? And I think a couple of things were, one, speaking to people in your field matters incredibly. It absolutely dictates whether or not you can have a clear understanding of what the field is about. And that's something that I got. Speaking to people who study in the same educational system is very helpful. That's something I didn't have. And so unfortunately, when I was applying for college in the UK, even though I had grown up in the UK, No one in my family had studied in the UK, and as a result, I don't think I made the best decisions necessarily. And as you go on and graduate, what's really important is not just speaking to one or two people, but actually speaking to dozens of individuals in your field. And it's something I was able to get growing up. And that's something that we want to recreate for students currently in the Philippines. The third point I wanted to share with you on my story is, how do we think about the decision-making process of students? And how do we think about what makes it easy for them to make the right decision? I think everyone will agree that online is the way to go. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to quit a career in finance was I saw that there was a rise in internet access in emerging markets, including the Philippines where I'm from. And so it felt like the right time. And so I think one of the learnings I have from my short journey so far is timing is incredibly important. I think if I had gone into this 2-3 years earlier with the exact same idea, the fact that internet penetration was less than 10% meant that the idea would have never taken off. And as now we've reached about 100,000 students just in the month of May, we're seeing that the ability to ride out on a positive macro factor is incredibly important. No matter how good your idea is, if the infrastructure is not in place, your EdTech program will just never survive. I think the other thing that we looked at was psychology. And this is where it's quite interesting. If you think of yourself as a founder, you're obviously very type A, and you're constantly looking for solutions, etc. And you will sometimes forget that your average customer will not be type A. In fact, your average customer is by definition not type A. And so you need to create a service, you need to create a product that doesn't just work for you and your peers, it's actually a product that has to work for someone who has no clue what they want to do, who may actually not even be that interested in figuring it out. A lot of students that we interact with don't just seem clueless, they seem uninterested in their future. So there's two options. You either berate them for it, or you accept that you will need to engage with them on things like music or consumer pop culture, or other items that are more interesting for them, and which will then kind of wean them into focusing more on their higher education. I think as I have about a minute left, I will share, I think a little bit of like success and failures. I'll start with the successes to make myself feel better. I think what we found was in education you have to take a multi-stakeholder approach. The whole adage of it takes a village to raise a child is absolutely true. When we started Edukasyon, we thought we could solve it just with one website. So we launched this website, we're very excited. Any student could log on for free and find out about thousands of courses in the Philippines and abroad. We felt great, and we had about 0 visits for the first 3 months. When we then decided to actually work with high schools, with foundations, with governments, with NGOs, we started finding that this is where you can engage with the students, because these are organizations that actually work with student groups, work with parents, and are brands that students associate with trust and making better choices. The second, I think, success that we found was constantly simplifying your product. Even though choosing your future education, your future career is an incredibly complex and daunting decision, which many of us are still grappling now, irrespective of our age, it's important to make it simple enough that it's not so daunting, so the student can understand that, oh, I only have to answer a few questions and already I'll be guided somewhat. I think if I look at our failures, the biggest one we probably had was trying to speak in a very cold, rational way to students. Especially when you're dealing with students who are not even 18 yet, you need to engage with them. And just telling kids to eat their vegetables is not the right way to do it. You need to have a certain language. It has to be perceived as somewhat trustworthy, but also somewhat fun, somewhat engaging. And it took us a year of failed engagement with students to figure that out. And on this note, thank you so much for your time today.
Now I would like to introduce Mr. Peter Mousaferiadis, who is the CEO and founder of Cultural Infusion. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Touhami. Thank you. I stand before you not as a son of Greek migrants who traveled to Australia for a better life in the 50s, but rather as a human being who stands in the shadow of a Greek philosopher who lived 2,400 years ago, Diogenes, or Diogenes. Diogenes was the first human to proclaim, I am a citizen of the world. The notion of a citizen of the world resonates with all of us and postulates that all human beings belong to a global community based on shared morality. The advent of the World Wide Web in 1989 has created a global superconnected age. Today, the ability to navigate our way through how we see each other, how we see the world, has become central to global citizenship. Good day, my name's Peter Mousaferiadis. I've spent 29 years working as a creative director, a manager, an agent, a music conductor, a composer, and a producer. In 2002, I founded Cultural Infusion as a response to the impact of globalization on society and as a means of addressing issues of lack of understanding of the other and a way of reducing ethnic and race-based discrimination. Over 3 decades, I have come to realize the power of the arts and culture, and that as a people, we don't do enough to draw upon humanity's greatest asset, cultural diversity, our most recognized brand, yet our most underutilized brand. Cultural Infusion has grown to more than 40 staff and delivers programs in 5 countries to more than 350,000 students annually. I wish to share a story with you about my father. At the age of 86, 3 years ago, he asked me in Greek, "Pedimo, my son, I have never quite understood. Tell me, what is it that you actually do?" One day you're conducting, the next day you're writing music, the next day you're directing and producing international events for clients such as the Parliament of the World Religions, the United Nations, the Australian government. Then I hear you're developing a winning slogan for the UN campaign. Then there's all the thousands of education programs you're delivering. And now I hear something about digital games. Tell me, what is this job? I don't get it. It really wasn't until that moment that the light bulb came on. I realized everything I did was not because of the actions I was involved with, but what drove me. The purpose behind what I did, the why. Everything I was involved with always used arts and culture as a meaningful driver to building intercultural understanding as a core value and key competency of global citizenship. I can't stress enough the why we do what we do at Cultural Infusion. According to UNESCO, 75% of all the conflict in the world has a cultural dimension. According to the Global Peace Index in 2016, 13.3% of the world's GDP is spent dealing with the cost of conflict. That's a shitload of money. To give you some idea, we're talking about $13.6 trillion. If 75% of all the conflict has a cultural dimension, then education is the solution. Culture is a mighty force. So much that UNESCO has officially recognized culture as an enabler and driver of sustainable development, and that culture is key to quality education, poverty eradication, a way of building socially cohesive and peaceful communities, and last but not least of all, a driver of innovation. Yes, we know that globalization brings global issues. Issues like exclusion, racism, disharmony, but even things like iPad addiction. The first 3 are problems we can address with education. The last I saw as an opportunity when I noticed my children's heads buried in this device all day long. If my kids, like everyone else's kids, are going to use these devices and have their heads in them, then how can we use them to open up their hearts? How can we use them to open up their minds? At Cultural Infusion, we have tirelessly worked away to create a new narrative. Jocko's World and our digital apps are a culmination of the last 3 decades of my work, my passion to tell the story that we all exist because of each other, and that the lifeblood of culture is confluence. Don't think for a moment it's ever been different. Jocko, a blue nightingale, invites children through music and storytelling, and most importantly, fun and gamification to explore cultures of the world all with the view of building global harmony. Thank you.
So the next speaker will be Tarek Fancy, who's the CEO and founder of the Rumie initiative. Tariq, you have the floor.
Thank you.
Yeah, the clicker. Thomas, the clicker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tariq. I'm the founder of Rumie. I see a few folks on their phones and computers. That always makes me really excited because I assume you're only taking notes, and I haven't even started yet. So I'm going to tell you a story about how my personal story leads into something that I think can impact 1 billion people and a massive leapfrog in access to education. And if I ever find the clicker, we can get started with the story. Well, okay, just imagine there's a screen, and on it there's a big Wall Street bull. That's my background. I spent a long time up until a few years ago in finance. So I started out as a tech banker in Silicon Valley. I worked in the group that did the IPOs of Amazon, Google, Cisco. And then a couple years later, I switched to a firm doing distressed investing, or what's called vulture investing. Really nice guys. We would go in and invest in bankrupt companies and turn them around. And here we go. And so that changed a few years ago because of this guy. Next slide, if we can change it. And long story short, I always had a passion to do international development. One of the investments I led when I was working in finance was to bring basic mobile phones into Africa and other emerging markets as a leapfrog innovation. We'd gotten really good at figuring out the timing of an intervention that could have massive impact, and in that case, it was a leapfrog over landlines. But my passion for international development wasn't getting truly fulfilled even when I was working in finance. So I took a year off and did an MBA, and I met this guy. This is Michiel, no, this guy. And Michiel and I shared a passion for using our business skills to do good. So he and I both worked in finance, but we wanted to eventually not just donate money, but actually change the entire models of how some of these social outcomes were being built. However, Michiel and I graduated and went back to finance because that's what everybody does. You know, you just get hoovered into the industry or hoovered back into it. And that changed a few years ago because he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And it was stage 4 melanoma. And if you know anything about that, that basically is not really a question of your odds, more a question of time. And when you have a lot of people who are saying, I'm going to do some good someday in life, and then they're diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, what you'll often find is, or at least, and I found this in Michiel's case, it wasn't so much a question of, you know, I'm going to do something eventually. It's basically now or never. And in his case, he was very passionate about using play to encourage education. And so he went to Kenya and founded a charity while he was fighting stage 4 cancer. Kenya happens to be where my parents were born and raised. I was the only member of my family not born in Kenya. I was born in Canada. And that organization exists to this day and is growing and so on. And he managed to do that in the 2.5 years that he was battling stage 4 cancer. And so I ended up deciding to do the same thing when I was visiting his family in Amsterdam. Actually, believe it or not, standing in his grave, and I said, listen, I've been lucky in life. I need to actually just walk the walk and go in and do it. And I had an idea. And that idea, as you'll see on the next slide, is to drive another leapfrog, but this time in education. The idea being that everything you want to learn, you can learn online for free. The traditional models of what the NGOs were doing seemed to me to be, let's ship textbooks to Africa. And the kind of idea was like, it's a big problem. There's 1 billion kids who are underserved in education. And the idea was just to keep putting more money down the funnel and just fundraising more and more. And our thought process is, well, can we just find a more efficient model to do that using all the free learning tools online? And the way we did that was that we took a low-cost device, we preloaded an entire library of free learning materials on it, and we did a trial in Haiti. Lean startup model through and through. And they found actually that on a device that's hardware cost is under $100, and it's the size and cost of one textbook, we had preloaded content that used to cost over $5,000 to produce in traditional paper format. So it's like taking $1 that you have and then using technology to create $100 of value. And as you'll see on the next slide, we've now expanded that to working all around the world. So we're in over 22 countries. We were backed by Y Combinator, which is the incubator behind Airbnb and Dropbox. We're backed by Google and a bunch of large companies. Boston Consulting Group has done our impact studies. And in fact, everything we're doing is a case study being taught in business schools that was written by Harvard Business School, being taught since last year. on how we built this model of being an NGO that sells at cost to be sustainable, but also uses our nonprofit status as an effective competitive advantage. And I'll finish on that point because I'm running out of time. But our biggest challenge was not actually delivering content offline, because increasingly people in emerging markets are getting basic smartphones, and we can just deliver free content to those. The challenge was always the curation of the content. And as you'll see on the next slide, we basically started engaging crowdsourcing behind that. Because my favorite business model when I was a tech banker, believe it or not, was the only one we couldn't IPO. It was Wikipedia, which used nonprofit status as actually a competitive advantage to, frankly, build a better product than Britannica and Encarta ever could, and actually put them out of business. And a few years ago, we started engaging the crowd, organizations, companies, and so on to contribute their skills remotely. That's allowed us to grow into different languages, different cultures, different regions, and we're pushing this heavily now as we go around the world to build a movement to help us collaboratively vet, curate, and organize the best free learning tools online. We all know that you can find anything you want online. The challenge is there's a lot of crap. There's a lot of cat videos, but there's a lot of good stuff, and we think it's something that can only be achieved in a collaborative way. So on that note, if you guys are interested in joining the movement, please come and join. We'd love to have more organizations and companies involved. Thanks.
So our next speaker is Simon Bailey, who's the Director of Partnerships at Aflatoun International. Simon, thank you.
Hi, I'm Simon Bailey. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Innovation at Aflatoun International. We're a global leading education organization that uses what's called social franchising as a way of distributing educational content to organizations around the world. And we're 10 years old, and we've reached 4.5 million children in 116 countries. My background is in different sorts of social innovations and social programs that work to improve the lives of disadvantaged individuals. I started in sort of access to finance and access to educational services in Canada. I worked in the microfinance sector around microinsurance, which is a great example of a scalable intervention. And now we're working at socially and financially empowering kids around the world. Increasingly, we're sort of looking at ways in which different types of collective action and different types of social and technological innovations can increase access to education. We have seen that access to high quality content is one, but technology is going to be one of those breakthrough initiatives that will allow us to scale our program and increase the quality of our interventions. We were sort of a Web 1.0 organization. We changed the way that content was distributed to different organizations, but we weren't really changing the way that education was happening within the classroom. And we sort of have been successful with that model, but we're sort of at our limit. And we work with about 200 different organizations around the world, and they're the people that are sort of trying to show us the way in this education technology space. So we have apps that have been built in countries like Poland that supplement our materials. We have 30,000 children in Pakistan that are using offline tools and different ways of bringing young people together in conversations to ferment social change. And most recently in Syria, we reached 10,000 children through 400 civil society actors that never actually meet. So we're seeing a bottom-up swell of organizations that are in the field that are using technology in their own ways to solve the technology challenge. And one of our big challenges with technology has always been that most of the children that we work with in the hardest to reach places are offline or don't have access to services. So how do you develop educational technology when 74% of your market, and that's the global figure, don't have access to the internet? So that's a market of about 1 billion children. We have sort of piloted what we think is going to be a successful initiative that will be able to scale across these different geographies with different organizations. We're partnered with the Orange Foundation and the Foundation for Learning Equality, and in 5 North and West African countries, we're providing content to 6,000 children in 150 schools. And what we're seeing is that technology can sort of provide additional content, but it can also reduce the costs for organizations to deliver educational programs, but also increase their quality. So we're really excited about this, and we're seeing more engaged children and young people who are in these schools. And I think maybe sort of speaking about some of the challenges, we've messed up in this area on a number of different occasions, and we're hoping that this is one of our breakthrough initiatives. I think a few things that we discounted early in the process was the access to content and availability online. So that was one of our first strategic areas. I think the other thing is the importance of teachers and providing teachers the tools that they need to not only implement the program that we want, but improve the general quality of education. And I also think they're a valuable stakeholder and a valuable source of information and the source of replicating power in the educational development field. I think the other key point is the importance of groups. Children like learning from each other, and we often try to work with children individually, and one of the key learnings that we've had is that one of the key powers of technology is the ability to add new content or add different types of content into discussions that are already happening. And I think the final thing is the advantage of partnering. So we work with organizations in 200 countries. Often they know what their consumers need or their customers or their children need. And it's about providing the types of tools that they are able to adapt and use for their own context that is successful. I think that's at the distribution end, but also at the top end, working with organizations that understand the space and being willing to sort of provide your content to other organizations will hopefully close that giant education gap that we're all struggling with. Thank you.
Our last speaker is William Zhu, who's the founder and CEO of Chalk.com. William?
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. My name is William, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about our story at Chalk.com. Before I get into the stories, we at Chalk are helping schools and districts make better decisions based upon in-classroom insights and information, whether that's answering questions like, does my curriculum actually work, to, well, how are my teachers actually delivering those instructions that we need them, right? So I've got 3 stories for you today, 3 real quick ones. I'll start with this. I'm not an educator, and really, in some ways, I didn't, end up, or didn't even know I would end up in education. My background is computer science. I'm an engineering by trade, and really, it was my own teachers, my own high school teachers that were the unsung heroes. They were the ones that were there every day instructing me, guided me to where I am today. And really, it's them that schooled me and told me that teaching is not just us coming up and lecturing you all. It's all the prep work we got to do. It's spending that individual time with every one of our students. It's all these menial tasks that needed to happen. And of course, me as an engineer took upon that challenge and said, well, what can I help? What can I do to help? What can I do to help you, my own teachers, out? And from that, boy, did I learn. It was an immense industry, right? I'm sure I don't have to preach to the choir here, that education is an immense industry and that technology can help a heck of a lot here. The next slide, Touhami, is really a story of my own co-founders. I have 2 co-founders, one of which, his name is Suraj. He leads some of our business development side of things. And this is a story of those unexpected events that just happens. Now, when we started in 2013, we went down to California for one of those programs. And of course, my co-founder, being an adventurer that he is, decided to actually ride all the way across North America, right, on a motorcycle. That's just his personality. Now, the day that we were waiting for him to show up was also the longest day of our lives because it was a day that he didn't show up. In fact, instead, we got a phone call. It was a phone call from the hospital saying that he's in the hospital. And it's one of those moments when I stared at my other co-founder, Ryan, and we said, does this mean the end of our company? Because he ended up in a hospital because he was exhausted from riding, and he actually crashed into a pole on the side of the road. We didn't know if he was going to be okay. He broke his ribs, he broke his arm, and ended up in the hospital for about a week. Now, when he came out, my co-founder and I had to take care of him, had to feed him, had to actually, in some case, wash him, before his parents picked him up, right? But when I look back to that day now, and those times, it made me realize just the bond that we've created. In fact, it's that bond that has allowed us to stay intact and allow us to plow forward today. And in fact, the next slide, one of the contacts that Suraj forged was this amazing forward-thinking district CIO, right, who oversees about 100 schools. And for him, during one of those conversations that I've had, we started this company really serving teachers. For him, the CIO said, well, Will, it's great you're doing all these teacher tools, but I've always had this question, this semester. I had this question, well, why did our grade 9 math scores go down? And I said, well, why? I thought he knew the answer. I asked a question right back at him. And he said, to be frank, I don't know. In fact, our district doesn't have that information, doesn't have that data at that granular level. And so that was a moment when we said, well, perhaps we're not just solving this teacher problem, perhaps there's even more systematic problems that we can solve, utilizing the data that we gather from all of these teacher tools that we have. And that's exactly what we've done at Chalk. It's not only to help the teachers out, but to provide, these intelligence that we can gather from the classroom in real time and help these districts out all over North America. And today we're proud to be serving really the teams behind millions of students in their strategic and operational improvements behind all of these schools. So I'll leave you with the last bit, which is really where we're headed. It's not only about serving these teams behind millions of students, but rather, what if we can gather enough information? What if we can actually understand the why behind what actually drives student success? To us, that is not only going to shape our company at Chalk, but that's actually going to shape the entire industry in helping us understand what actually drives education. So that's our story. We certainly would love any partners, anybody who's interested to come and chat with us. My name is William, and this is Chalk. Thanks.
Thank you, William. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance and for your time. I invite you to meet our founders and CEOs, and yes, to the next time.